Lesson 4. The United Nations and Contemporary World Governance. Despite the dream of a global government, like internationalist Bentham Kant imagined the possibility of it, where according to Bentham classic definition, international law is a collection of rules governing relations between states. Immanuel Kant also argued that the natural states of humankind is one of war and conflict. However, he also suggested that states can establish peace among themselves, but nothing of the sort exists today. States generally follow global navigation routes and respects each other's territorial boundaries. Moreover, when they do not like it, like when Russia invaded Crimea in 2014 and then later annexed it, it becomes a cause for global concern and debate. The fact that states in an international order continue to adhere to certain global norms means that there is a semblance of world order despite the lack of a single world government. We have here some clips of the said situation where Russia invaded Crimea in 2014.
Moving swiftly to take control of military bases in Crimea, where voters decided to rejoin Russia. Those troops shooting their way into one of those bases, and after they did, look at this tonight. A surveillance camera right here that had been recording people coming and going outside that base. Suddenly you see that soldier's hand reaching in, ripping it out, the camera going black. ABC's Alex Marquardt and our team finding themselves in the middle of that firestorm. Russian authorities suddenly demanding that Alex and our team turn over their material. They did not, and tonight Alex reports in from Crimea.
Armored Russian vehicles burst through the wall of Crimea's Belbek base today, firing warning shots and throwing sound grenades. Ukrainian forces have set up a perimeter, but it's clear that we are completely surrounded by Russian forces. Masked Russian special forces fanned out, rifles at the ready. The mostly unarmed Ukrainians were ordered not to fight back, commanders trying to avoid bloodshed at all costs. This is a very tense standoff between those Russian special forces right there, the Ukrainian soldiers right here who have turned their backs on the Russians, refusing to surrender, but they may soon not have a choice. Colonel Yuli Mamchur called his men to attention and emotionally thanked them for their service before they proudly burst into the national anthem. Then the Russian forces kicked us out and tried to confiscate our footage. They then seized control of the base and arrested Colonel Mamchur. Another Crimean base was also violently taken today by Russian forces, along with a Ukrainian ship and submarine, as Russia now completes its takeover of Crimea.
Why did Russia invade Crimea?
Here's why Crimea matters so much to Russia and why they won't likely reverse course. Despite Russia's vast size and coastline, it has very few warm water ports. In Crimea, the port of Sevastopol offers Russia a key naval base, one that it has relied on since the 18th century. It's where Russia projects its naval power into the Black Sea, Mediterranean, and beyond. In 2008, during its brief war with Georgia, warships from Sevastopol were used to blockade the country, and the base is also reportedly being used to supply the Assad regime in Syria.
But that's not the only reason it has brought the big guns here. A year and a half after the annexation, the Kremlin started operations in Syria.
Also at stake is Crimea's large hydrocarbon resources. Ukraine's then Energy Minister Stepan Kubiv said in 2019 that Ukraine has lost 80% of its oil and gas deposits in the Black Sea and a significant part of its infrastructure due to the annexation of Crimea. Large natural gas deposits in the Black Sea lie within Russia's claimed exclusive economic zone, and Russia has also started bypassing Ukraine entirely when exporting gas to Europe.
Russia says the old pipelines that brought its gas to Western Europe have reached their capacity limit. Nord Stream 2 adds 2 more lines. But it also makes Russia far less dependent on the pipelines that cross Ukrainian territory. And that makes Ukraine nervous. It needs gas.
For many Russian nationalists, Crimea was wrongly given to Ukraine by then Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev. For Russia's leaders, Crimea is also about maintaining influence in former Soviet states.
When the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, its western territory broke into independent states, including Ukraine. They formed a buffer between Russia and Western Europe. But in the 90s and 2000s, these countries started drifting westward, and many joined the EU. By invading Ukraine, Putin was able to destabilize and stop it from developing a stronger relationship with Western Europe.
There are also concerns that a Turkic ethnic group, the Crimean Tatars, who make up 12% of Crimea's population, are being persecuted.
Local Tatar men are arrested. They're accused of being members of an illegal Islamic group. Brother, we are with you, one man shouts. Activists say it's the latest act of repression against Crimea's Tatar community.
7 years ago, Joe Biden was vice president when Russia seized Crimea. Now, as president, Biden says he will get tough on Moscow. For some, Russia's annexation of Crimea was an attempt to return the country to its Soviet glory days. But for many others, the move was a flagrant violation of international law.
Again, global governance refers to the various intersecting processes that create this order. There are many sources of global governance. States sign treaties and form organizations, in the process legislating public international law. International law is an international rules that govern interactions between states as opposed to, say, private companies. International non-governmental organizations or NGOs, though not having formal state power, can lobby individual states to behave in a certain way. For example, we have an international animal protection that is non-governmental organization can pressure government to pass animal cruelty laws. Powerful transnational corporations can likewise have tremendous effect on global labor. And the environmental legislation, trade policy, etc., or more, even ideas such as the need for global democracy or the clamor for good governance can influence the ways international actors behave. Now, let's talk about what is an international organization. When scholars refer to the groups like the United Nations or institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, but first, let's make a recap. The IMF or the International Monetary Fund is a global organization that works to achieve sustainable growth and prosperity for all of its 190 member countries. It does so by supporting economic policies that promote financial stability and monetary cooperation, which are essential to increase productivity, job creation, and economic well-being. While World Bank created in 1944 to help Europe rebuild after the World War II. IBRD joins with IDA, our fund for the poorest countries, to form the World Bank. They call them international organizations or IOs, although international non-governmental organizations or NGOs are sometimes considered as IOs. The term is commonly used to refer to international intergovernmental organizations or groups that are primarily made up of member states. One major fallacy about international organizations is that they are merely amalgamations of various states' interests. In 1960s and 1970s, many scholars believe that international organizations or IOs were just venues where the contradicting but sometimes intersecting agendas of countries were discussed no more than talk shops. What has become more evident in recent years, however, is that IOs can take on lives of their own. For example, as seen in Lesson 2, the International Monetary Fund was able to promote a particular form of economic orthodoxy that stemmed mainly from the beliefs of its professional economists. International organizations can thus become influential as dependent organizations. International relations scholars Michael N. Barnett and Martha Fenimore listed the following powers of international organizations. Now let's talk about the power of international organization. First, IOs have the power of classification because IOs can invent and apply categories. This create powerful global standards. For example, it is the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, that defines what a refugee is. Refugees are people who have fled war, violence, conflict, or persecution and have crossed an international border to find safety in another country. And since states are required to accept refugees entering their borders, this power to establish identity has concrete effects. And again, UNHCR is the one who helps to save lives and build better future for the millions of people forced to flee their homes. UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, works to ensure that everybody has the right to seek asylum and find safe refuge having fled violence, persecution, or war at home. The second power that the international organization has is that they have the power to fix meanings. This is a broader function related to the first. Various terms like security or development need to be well defined. States, organizations, and individuals view international organizations as legitimate sources of information. As such, the meanings they created have effects on various policies. For example, recently the United Nations has started to define security as not just safety from military violence, but also safety from environmental harm. Finally, international organizations have the power to diffuse norms. Norms are accepted codes of conduct that may not be strict law, but nevertheless produce regularity and behavior. IOs do not only classify and fix meanings, they also spread their ideas across the world, thereby establishing global standards. Their members are Barnett and Fenimore, where they emphasizes that missionaries of our time. Their power to diffuse norms stems from the fact that IOs are staffed with independent bureaucracies who are considered experts in various fields. For example, World Bank. World Bank economists come to be regarded as experts in development and thus carry some form of authority. They can therefore create norms regarding the implementation and conceptualization of development projects.
Having examined the powers, limitations, and weaknesses of the IOs, the spotlight will now fall on the most prominent IO in the contemporary world, the United Nations or the UN. After the collapse of League of Nations at the end of World War II, countries that worried about another global war began to push for the formation of a more lasting international league. The result was the creation of the UN. Although organization is far from perfect, it should be emphasized that it has so far achieved its primary goal of averting another global war. For this reason alone, the UN should be considered a success. But first, we are going to tackle or discuss what is the League of Nations in order for us to know its history and its connection between the United Nations. Take your time for us to wonder the first intergovernmental organization established to promote international cooperation and to achieve world peace and security. The League of Nations. What was the League of Nations, you ask? The League of Nations has its origin in the 14-point speech of the President of the America, Woodrow Wilson, part of a presentation given in 1918 outlining of his ideas for peace after the carnage of the World War I. Wilson envisioned an organization that was charged with resolving conflicts before they exploded into bloodshed and warfare. The League of Nations was an international diplomatic group developed after World War I as a way to solve disputes between countries before they erupted into an open warfare. A precursor to the United Nations, the League achieved some victories but had a mixed record of success, sometimes putting self-interest before becoming involved with conflict resolution, while also contending with governments that did not recognize its authority. The League effectively cased operation during World War II. The League of Nations was set up in 1919, directly after the World War I. It was designed to stop war from happening again. The League has four main aims. Firstly, to encourage cooperation among the world's countries in order to prevent future wars. Second is the disarmament or banning of weapons. The third one is to improve social conditions, control diseases, improve people's life, and etc. or improves people working condition. And finally, the League's main aim was world peace. Its aim in being too ambitious, but the League was nevertheless generally seen by many as the only way to maintain peace in the world. It must be said, however, that another world war broke out only 20 years after the creation of the League. World War II began in 1939, and many historians have condemned the League for failing to achieve its aims, leading us to question, was the League of Nations a total failure? The League's weaknesses. The League's weaknesses is that the League did not have an army, and therefore no powerful means to enforce its decision, and instead had to rely on countries like Britain and France. Another critical weakness was the most powerful country in the world, the USA or the United States of America, did not join the League during that time. When President Woodrow Wilson returned home, the America Congress refused to allow the USA to join the League, as instead it wanted to stay out of Europe's arguments in order to prevent them from being dragged into another war. In addition, the League's organization was confusing. It had a council of the most important countries, a secretariat that organized the League, a variety of different agencies that dealt with the slave trade, drug dealing, etc., in an assembly where countries met just once a year. Making decisions was therefore a problem because everyone had to agree. This meant that it took a long time to get anything done. Decisions had to be made unanimously, and this slowed down the entire process of the League. Aside from weaknesses, the League of Nations also has its success. In the 1920s, it can be seen that the League was successful enough. It took 500,000 prisoners of war after the World War I. It helped to arrest slave traders and drug dealers, and it made progress in helping to control and cure diseases like malaria and leprosy. It also solved the dispute over the Åland Islands. This stopped a war between Sweden and Finland, in which the League brought the countries together and solved the problem. Another example was in 1923. The League helped to solve arguments over Corfu between Italy and Greece where nearly they went to war over the island of Khufu. Failures in the 1930s. Two events destroyed people's belief in the ability of the League to stop wars. In both situations, the League did not act quickly enough or made poor decisions about how to stop the aggressive nation. At the same time, they showed people like Hitler that the League was not strong enough to stand in his way. Another event was that Japan invaded Manchuria, an area of China. This was clearly an example of a strong country invading a weaker one. It took the League one full year to make a report to send Lord Lytton about what should be done. This was a long and frustrating delay. The League wanted to ban all countries from trading with Japan, but it bought most of its goods from the USA, which is not part from the League. In fact, Britain wanted to stay friends with Japan, and without threat of attack, Japan got away with it and simply left the League. 1935 is an Italy invaded Abyssinia, also known today as the Ethiopian Empire. Again, another example of a strong country invading the weaker one. Lastly, Britain and France were still feeling the effects of the Depression. The League could have banned countries from trading with Italy, but unemployment was rising during this time, and they felt that to stop trading would mean the loss of even more jobs. Instead, Britain and France actually made a secret plan to allow Italy to control an area of Abyssinia. This was a great news to Hitler. During this period, Hitler got away with rearmament, the process of equipping military forces with a new supply of weapons, marching his troops into the Rhineland and joining with Austria. That we are done talking with the League of Nations, let us go to the United Nations. United Nations is an intergovernmental organization whose stated purpose are to maintain international peace and security, develop friendly relations among nations, achieve international cooperation, and serve as the center of the harmonizing actions of nations. It is one place where the world's nations can gather, discuss common problems, and find shared solutions. The United Nations, or the UN, has five main active organs. First is the General Assembly. Second is the Security Council. And third one is the ECOSOC, or Economic and Social Council. The fourth one is the ICG, or the International Court of Justice. And the fifth one is the Secretariat. And today we are going to tackle all of those five active organs of the United Nations. First active organ of the UN is the General Assembly. General Assembly is the UN's main deliberative policy-making and representative organ. According to the UN Charter, decisions on important questions, such as those on peace and security, admission of new members, and budgetary matters, requires a two-thirds majority of the General Assembly. Decisions on other questions are done by simple majority. Annually, the General Assembly elects a GE president to serve a one-year term of office. All member states, currently at 193, have seats in the GA. The Philippines played a prominent role in the GE's early years. Filipino diplomat Carlos P. Romulo was elected as the GE, or General Assembly President, in the year 1949 to 1950. The GE is also known as the heart of the UN. The Assembly meets in regular sessions from September to December each year, and thereafter, as required, it discusses specific issues through dedicated agenda. items or sub-items which lead to the adoption of resolution. Seating arrangement in the General Assembly Hall changed for its session during the 78th session 2023 to 2024. North Macedonia will occupy the first seat in the hall, including in the main committees, followed by the other countries. And it is based in English alphabetical order.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we are living in an era of peril. We have so many fires burning. Syria, the South Sudan, Central African Republic, Libya. There is nothing we cannot overcome. It's not crisis of political issues. It's a crisis of global solidarity.
This week is critical. It's the 1 week of the year where all 193 world leaders or their representatives gather in one city, often here in one room, especially on the opening day of the General Assembly. We have more than 1,500 bilateral meetings between different heads of states and heads of government. It's a good time for leaders to speak face to face, to try to deal with tensions that may arise and reestablish or establish relations and recommit themselves to the ideals that are found in the UN Charter.
There is a bit of performance when you're interpreting. You need to be in good physical shape and then trying to tune out anything else that's happening in the booth, outside the booth, in my life, and just concentrate on whatever I'm doing. The general debate is always very high level. Heads of state and government, but also singers and TV personalities. We had Angelique Kidjo, Shakira saying,
"Now is the time to not just imagine, but do."
Malala also spoke. Pope Francis was a moment I will not forget.
Although the GE is the most representative organization in the UN, many commentators considered the Security Council to be the most powerful. According to the UN, this body consists of 15 member states. The GE elects 10 of these 15 to 2-year terms. The other 5, sometimes referred to as the Permanent 5 or the P5. And these nations or countries are China, France, Russia, and the United Kingdom, and the United States. These states have been permanent members since the founding of the UN and cannot be replaced through election. The Secretary Council takes the lead in determining the existence of a threat to the peace or an act of aggression. It calls upon the parties to a dispute to settle the act by peaceful means and recommends methods of adjustment or terms of settlement. In some cases, it can resort to imposing sanction or even authorizing the use of force to maintain or restore international peace and security. Because of these powers, states that seek to intervene militarily in another state need to obtain approval of the EC. With the EC's or the Security Council approval, a military intervention may be deemed legal. And this is what made the EC have an immense power. Much attention has been placed on the EC's P5 due to their permanent seats and because each country holds veto power over the country's or the council's decision, it only takes one veto vote from a P5 member to stop an EC action dead in its tracks. In this sense, the Security Council is here to the tradition of great power, diplomacy that began with the Metternich Concert of Europe system. It is especially telling that the P5 consists of the major.
Here in the Security Council chamber, delegates work tirelessly to uphold the goals of the United Nations Charter to maintain international peace and security. Seated around the horseshoe-shaped table, 15 members of the Council meet almost on a daily basis to discuss conflict situations around the world. The chamber was gifted by the Norwegian government and designed by the Norwegian architect Arnstein Arnberg. The blue and gold silk wall coverings and drapes were designed by Else Poulsen and depict the anchor of faith, the growing wheat of hope, and the heart of charity. The mural was designed by the Norwegian artist Per Krog.
Now that we are done talking about the second active UN organ, let us now proceed to the third one, the Economic and Social Council, or commonly known as the ECOSOC, which is the principal body for coordination, implementation, policy review, policy dialogue, and recommendation on social and environmental issues, such as the implementation of internationally agreed developmental goals. It has 54 members elected for a 3-year term. Currently, it is in the UN's central platform for discussion on sustainable development. The work of ECOSOC involves so many issues that it has many commissions to help. Some are known as functional commissions. They meet regularly and report back to it on such issues as human rights, social development, the status of women, crime prevention, narcotic drugs, and science and technology. Other regional commissions deal with special problems that people living in different geographical areas face. ECOSOC has 5 regional commissions that promote economic development and cooperation in the respective regions. And here are those 5 regional commissions that promote economic development. First is the Economic Commission for Africa, or ECA. Economic Commission for Europe, or ECE, Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, or ECLAC, Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, or commonly known as the ESCAP, Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia, or ESCWA. And that is the last part of the ECOSOC.
The Economic and Social Council Chamber, also called ECOSOC, is a gift from Sweden. It was originally designed by Swedish architect Sven Markelius. who was also part of the team of 11 architects who designed the headquarters. Covering the tall glass windows hangs a curtain by An Edhal, Dialogos, reminding us of the mutual exchange of views on equal terms embodied in the deliberations taking place in this chamber. The architect left the ceiling above the public gallery exposed, intentionally leaving the pipes and ducts for everyone to see, which became a symbolic reminder of the ongoing struggle of economic and social development for all.
The fourth active organ of the UN or United Nations is the International Court of Justice, whose task is to settle in accordance with international law legal disputes submitted to it by states and to give an advisory opinions referred it by authorized United Nations organs and specialized agencies. The major cases of the court consist of disputes between states that voluntarily submit themselves to the court for arbitration. The court, as such, cannot try individuals. International criminal cases are heard by the International Criminal Court, which is independent of the UN, and its decisions are only binding when states have explicitly agreed to place themselves before the court's authority. The Security Council may enforce the rulings of the ICJ, but this remains subject to the P5's veto power. The International Court of Justice is the principal judicial organ of the United Nations. Its seat is the Peace Palace in Hague, in Netherlands. It is the only one of the 6 principal organs of the United Nations not located in New York or United States of America.
The International Court of Justice is the principal judicial organ of the United Nations. The seat of the court is at the Peace Palace in The Hague, the Netherlands. Of the 6 main organs of the United Nations, it is the only one not located in New York. Established in June 1945 by the Charter of the United Nations, the court began work in April 1946. The court's role is to settle, in accordance with international law, legal disputes submitted to it by states, known as contentious proceedings, and to give advisory opinions on legal questions referred to it by authorized United Nations organs and specialized agencies, known as advisory proceedings. The predecessor of the ICJ, the Permanent Court of International Justice, which was established in 1920 and dissolved with the adoption of the United Nations Charter in 1945, also had its seat at the Peace Palace in The Hague. The palace has thus housed the ICJ and the Permanent Court of International Justice for nearly 100 years.
Did you know that Filipino played a significant role in the creation of human rights arbitration rules in the United Nations? In the late 1960s, the diplomat Salvador P. Lopez was the chairman of the United Nations Commission on Human Rights. Lopez and other Filipinos helped design the system whereby any citizens of any state may petition on the UN to look into human rights violations in a country. That system exists until today. Human rights, therefore, are not foreign impositions. They are part of our national heritage. He was appointed by President Diosdado Macapagal as Secretary of Foreign Affairs and then became the ambassador to the United Nations for 6 years before being reassigned to France for 7 years. He would also serve as a chairperson of the United Nations Commission on Human Rights. Among those 4 that I've mentioned, the last active organ of the UN is the Secretariat. Secretariat consists of the Secretary General and tens of thousands of international UN staff members who carry out the day-to-day work of the UN as mandated by the General Assembly and the organization's other principal organs. As such, it is the bureaucracy of the UN, serving as a kind of international civil service. Members of the Secretariat serve in their capacity as UN employees and not as state representatives. The United Nations Secretariat carries out the day-to-day work of the UN as mandated by the General Assembly and the organization's other main organ. According to the UN, the Secretary General is the head of the Secretariat, which has tens of thousands of UN staff members working at duty stations over the world. Its staff members are recruited internationally and locally and work in duty stations and on peacekeeping missions, serving the cause of peace in a violent world and where the world is a dangerous occupation. Since the founding of the United Nations, hundreds of brave men and women have given their lives in its service. Another fact about the Secretariat is that it is organized along departmental lines, with each department or office having a distinct area of action and responsibility. Offices and departments coordinate with each other to ensure cohesion in the UN's program of work. Much of the UN Secretariat is located in New York City, USA. The UN also has three major offices outside of its headquarters in five regional economic commissions. Stated by Antonio Guterres, the United Nations Secretary General, he states that in the end, it comes down to values. We want the world our children inherit to be defined by the values enshrined in the UN Charter: peace, justice, respect, human rights, tolerance, and solidarity. So that would be all on behalf of my part in the United Nations discussion. And now, let us proceed to the challenges of the UN, which will be reported or discussed by one of our members, or one of my members, Shin An Lindiu.
Let's talk about the challenges of UN. Given the scope of the UN's activities, it naturally faces numerous challenges. The UN is not a world government, whereas UN is a forum where countries meet to discuss important issues such as human rights, social and economic development, and the fight against terrorism, among others. And it functions primarily because of voluntary cooperation from states. If states refuse to cooperate, the influence of the UN can be severely circumscribed. For example, the UN Council on Human Rights can send special rapporteur to countries where alleged human rights violations are occurring. This information gathering mechanism usually fails to achieve its goals. The biggest challenge of the United Nations is related to issues of security. Security Council is tasked with authorizing international peace and security or international acts of military intervention. Because of the P5's veto power, it is tough for the Council to release a formal resolution. P5's veto power is the power of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council to veto any substantive resolution. It was agreed by the drafters that if any one of the 5 permanent members cast a negative vote in the 15 members of Security Council, the resolution or decision would not be approved. All 5 members have exercised the right to veto at one time or another. For example, in the late 1990s, when the United States sought to intervene in the Kosovo War, Serbian leader Slobodan Milosevic, war-committing actor of ethnic cleansing against ethnic Muslim Albanians in the province of Kosovo. The Kosovo War was an armed conflict in Kosovo that lasted from 28 of February 1998 until 11 of June 1999.
It was fought between the forces of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, which controlled Kosovo before the war, and the Kosovo Albanian rebel group known as the Kosovo Liberation Army. The conflict ended when the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, intervened by beginning airstrikes in March 1999, which resulted in Yugoslavia forces withdrawing from Kosovo. Through the NATO intervention was largely a success. It nevertheless left the UN ineffectual.
NATO says around 25 peacekeepers have been wounded in unprovoked attacks. The unrest is focused around several towns in the north. Tensions have been rising since the mayors took office last week.
NATO peacekeepers and Kosovo police pulled injured officers to safety as protests spun out of control. The chaos came after ethnic Serbs demonstrating in Zvečan refused to move for Kosovar special police vehicles. Peacekeeper soldiers used tear gas and stun grenades to clear the protesters, who responded by throwing rocks, bottles, and even explosives. Cars were also set alight as demonstrators demanded the removal of ethnic Albanian officials from local office. Ethnic Serb demonstrators also want special police to leave the area.
So let us talk about the war in Syria. Today, a similar dynamic is evident in Syria, which is undergoing a civil war. The Syrian civil war is an ongoing multi-sided conflict in Syria involving various state-sponsored and non-state actors. In March 2011, popular discontent with the rule of Bashar al-Assad triggered large-scale protests and pro-democracy rallies across Syria as part of a wider Arab Spring protest on the region. Since Syria President Bashar al-Assad is an ally of Russian dictator Vladimir Putin, the latter has shied away from any policy that could weaken the legitimacy of a former. So as a result, the UN again is ineffectual amid a conflict that has led to over 220,000 people died and 11 million displaced.
NATO says around 25 peacekeepers have been wounded in unprovoked attacks. The unrest is focused around several towns in the north. Tensions have been rising since the mayors took office last week.
NATO peacekeepers and Kosovo police pulled injured officers to safety as protests spun out of control. The chaos came after ethnic Serbs demonstrating in Zvečan refused to move for Kosovar special police vehicles. Peacekeeper soldiers used tear gas and stun grenades to clear the protesters, who responded by throwing rocks, bottles, and even explosives. Cars were also set alight as demonstrators demanded the removal of ethnic Albanian officials from local office. Ethnic Serb demonstrators also want special police to leave the area.
Despite these problems, it remains important for the SC or the Security Council to place a high bar on military intervention. When the United States sought to invade Iraq in 2001, it claimed that Iraq's Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction that threatened the world. Saddam Hussein was an Iraq politician and revolutionary who served as the 5th president of Iraq from 1979 to 2003. A weapon of mass destruction is a nuclear, radiological, chemical, biological, or other device that is intended to harm a large number of people. However, UN members Russia, China, and France were unconvinced and vetoed the UN resolution for intervention, forcing the United States to lead a small coalition of ruling with its allies. It has since been discovered that there were no weapons of mass destruction, and the invasion of Iraq has caused problems for the country and the region that last until today.
That would be all. And thank you all for watching.